Welcome to the Last Beer Show.
You ready to start then?
Yeah, let's just start it out. And
Okay. We'll start it out.
Tell me, I guess it's tradition now where I ask you. We start out by me asking you what it is that you've consumed since our last recording, which was a while ago.
Yes. So I've been drinking a lot of unique and interesting beers lately. And then of course we had a big I know
Really?
it's hard to believe, but last night we had a big bottle share last night to launch the release of my newest home brew, which is a Belgian triple with coffee, and so
which is delicious.
And we had a big bottle share here last night, so we opened up a lot of really, really cool bottles of beer last night. I'm starting to get to the point of where I'm not just a fan of bottle shares where it's just like super whale fest, where it's like the most crazy exclusive bottles, but I'm more of a fan of these bottle shares where it's just like really cool, unique beers that you weren't expecting to be that good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think bottle share they don't all have to be rare whales. Like,
no. I mean, I brought out several beers last night where I heard people literally saying, "Man, I think this might be my favorite beer. I had no idea it was going to be that good." And that actually is a lot more rewarding than being like, "Oh my God, I had a Black Tuesday." You know, like
what beer was that?
We had two of them last night. One of them was Monday Night Brewing's Tears of My Enemies, which is a Scotch barrel aged imperial stout. I think honestly, it's probably one of the best beers that they brewed. It's a freaking delicious beer. It is a milk stout, a Scotch barrel milk stout,
right?
And is just an incredible balanced beer. But then that one, and then also the other beer was Scofflaw Brewing's Vanilla Absinthium, barrel aged Absinthium, which is a really phenomenal beer.
That is
for
a
them.
really good beer.
Yeah, they're a very new brewery to the market, and they're already creating some really good beers.
They've hit the ground running. I mean, they have a few that are just phenomenal initial efforts.
Yep.
That's cool, man.
Yeah.
I know you really like some of those little more obscure beers. I know anyone listening can't see, but I'm surrounded by about 100 bottles of unique beers.
Another one that was a really big success last night, and it's just a really cool beer, is it's the Rare Barrel Wicked Weed collaboration, which is called Happy Blending, and it is a barrel-aged imperial sour ale fermented with plums and nectarines. Wicked Weed is this amazing brewery in Asheville. They have an amazing barrel program called Funkatorium, and they are doing some really, really cool things out of Asheville. And then, of course, Rare Barrel is out of Berkeley, California, and they're a barrel-only sour program, and they put out some amazing beers too. So I knew that the two of them working on a beer was going to be something really special. And this beer is really unique in that you actually taste, in my mind, I taste the Rare Barrel components of what I think this is like. This reminds me of Rare Barrel.
You think you can taste their contributions?
I think I can, honestly. Like, I know what Wicked Weed beers generally taste like, and I know what Rare Barrel beers, because I've had enough of them.
Right.
And I feel like I can actually taste the bits and pieces of each one of them. So it's a really unique beer. But so that was we went to that release was last Friday. We drove up to Asheville for the release of that, and that brings us to another point, which is the amazing amount of releases that are happening on a regular basis. I find myself like literally not even being able to go to all of the releases that happen during the week in our region.
Yeah, you mean like the release parties or events at breweries or at bottle shops, or sometimes they have them at pubs. And
Yep.
Yeah, I can't hit. I don't even. I used to go to those a lot. I don't go to them much at all anymore because, like you said, there's just too many. It's hard to pick. And really, they hit the market now very quickly soon after. with such frequency and reliability that I don't feel like I have to go anymore. Like for a while, there was a time, certainly in the state of Georgia where we live, where a lot of the most rare beers were only distributed via keg. So you had to go to one of the great pubs to get it. And then maybe at some point it would come out in bombers. Whereas now they're coming out on all fronts. There's bombers, there's cans a lot of the times now, which are great. It's available in growlers. Back then we also didn't have growlers. Now we have growlers, so you can get draft beer at a bottle shop. And now that you can get draft beer at breweries, it's just more accessible now. So those events aren't as necessary.
Yeah. I think one of the main drivers for a lot of those breweries to still do those and people to still attend is like, they usually bring variants and they usually bring older versions of it. So like if it's a like Bourbon County Stout release, for instance, they'll bring, last year's coffee or something like that. They'll have a keg of it, which is hard for me to believe that they just like have all of these kegs.
They just got them sitting around.
I mean, they
sit around in a closet.
So odd to me, but they do, they'll show up with like a 2014 keg of Bourbon County Stout. You're like, they just have a warehouse filled with these kegs of this beer, which is ridiculous.
Do you know what the street value of this mountain is?
Yeah, I know, exactly.
It's pure snow.
People are breaking into trucks just for old kegs of Bourbon County Stout. But it's just, it's incredible. Like literally you could go to a release or a beer event every night if you wanted to. I have to make myself stop just because my life has to be more than just beer. I know it's hard to understand, but and that's the challenge, So I've been drinking a lot of beer. There's been a lot of releases.
Sounds like you've been drinking a lot of beer.
We went to Asheville last Friday, and then of course we were in Decorah, Iowa, a few weeks ago for the KBBS Assassin release, which was a pretty incredible thing.
Right.
I know I haven't really talked a lot about that, but we actually, a good buddy of mine who also won the lottery to get tickets, we actually flew up to Minneapolis, got a rental car, and then drove down to Decorah, Iowa, which is about a 2.5 hour drive.
I think we'll get to that. I think it would be interesting. I don't think everyone has participated in a brewery lottery for a limited release. So it would be interesting to hear how that process worked. And then also, once you had that beer, like the process and the thought process you went through, and then also the physical process you went through of deciding whether to keep those or move any of those bottles or all of those bottles on the secondary market, which I know you're very passionate about getting to.
Yeah, we're going to talk about
Pump the brakes. I just finished my pint of Fuzzy Baby Ducks IPA from New England Brewing. And this is an interesting story. This is not available in our community.
Yeah, that's correct.
This is not distributed to Georgia where we live. This is something that was brought to your bottle share via trade. We would not normally have been able to get. Certainly not as a growler. Uh-oh.
No, I'd never even heard of New
this
England
just
Brewing
in.
Company.
We're receiving a phone call.
We want to welcome to the show Chris Herron, who is the CEO of Creature Comforts. Chris, tell us a little bit about how Creature Comforts was founded and kind of what your desire was with Creature Comforts in helping establish Creature Comforts as the brewery in Athens.
Sure, man. Creature's story starts well before me. Really, David Stein was kind of the key piece of the early puzzle, and one of the first ones he was using the name Creature Comforts as a sort of moniker for his home brews, and through a set of circumstances, he got put in touch with some people that had capital and were interested in opening a brewery in Athens, which is where David went to college at, and he got in touch with them and brought on Adam Beecham, who was a brewer over at Sweetwater at the time, and then they had another guy locally, Derek Imes, who was helping out with the business side of the equation. And then I really came on about 2 months before we opened. And at that point, they had pretty much dialed in all the recipes. Not that I would have been very much help anyways on the beer side of things. And when I got in, really just worked a lot with them on sort of branding, the sales tactics, the financial strategies, and that aspect of things. And then, me, Adam, and David are still the operating owners, and, here day in and day out, and it's been the same three of us since we opened the doors, sort of day in and day out here. And it's been a pretty incredible journey, a lot of work, a lot of hours, but we're certainly grateful for it.
Yeah, you guys have certainly established yourself as one of the more innovative and one of the best newer breweries in the country. I know that you guys were in California recently. You guys were at Modern Times serving beer out there, which is pretty incredible. It's cool to see the Creature Comfort story head to the other coast. What has been the biggest surprise for you about the success of Creature Comforts?
I think it's kind of what you just touched on. It is, sort of how far away from home the brand gets recognized. And, when we go to festivals, and we've been to Alaska, we've been to California multiple times. So you mentioned Modern Times. We've been up there for Firestone Walker's Invitational. We've been up to New York, Ohio, down to Florida, Indiana, sort of all over. And we're, I'd say, just constantly blown away by the reception that we get that far from home. I think it speaks a lot to the beer trading world and where that's at today, and the ability for people to get your product well beyond where you naturally sell it. But, we're still a very limited footprint. It's Athens and Atlanta where we can get it to. And so it's always pretty humbling, and at the same time pretty amazing to be in Ohio and have people line up for your beer. So I think that's been sort of, for me, one of the biggest surprises, coming from, sort of a more corporate, big alcohol background, where you're always with these national distributed brands. I was amazed to find out that even, as a small local brand, that we'd be able to get recognition as broadly as we have.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I was thinking about, and we're going to talk a little bit about trading, but I personally am a trader, and I know that for me, one of the beers that I most get asked for in terms of trading is Creature Comforts Tropicalia, and it's mostly from people in California. And it's always been just incredible for me to think about the demand that people have for this beer on the other coast who are just hearing about it, and who literally just like, I want to get my hands on some of that Tropicalia. And, now with some of your other releases, which are, in my opinion, some of these other cool releases that you're doing with beers like Green Ghost and some of these other the beers, one-off beers that you're doing, that demand only increases. So with the huge success and popularity of beers like Sea the Stars and Existence and then the whole Curious series, which are all sours, you've had a lot of these beers that have been sucked into that secondary market space. And just curious, what are your thoughts on that secondary market for beers?
Yeah, and I think the secondary market for beer has been a really interesting thing. I'll say for me, I was not really into beer trading prior to getting involved with Creature, and as much as I thought I understood it, I realize now just how little I knew about it. I think beer trading can play a pretty vital role in building a brand in today's marketplace. We, even without the desire to sell our beer outside of the state lines, I mean, we're very committed to Georgia. We definitely have a Georgia first mentality. We're not interested. We're not pursuing. We're not even looking at where we would go next. We don't have those conversations. We still think we got a lot of work to do locally. But it's what's interesting is that through the beer trading, and you mentioned getting requests for beer in California. That request for beer coming from someone in California to a person in Georgia makes that person in Georgia that much more excited about the beer. And there's this halo effect that goes around from all these creators outside of it, getting excited about your beer. It makes the local market that much more excited about the beer, which, in turn helps drive sales in the home market. And from that perspective, it's really good. I think if there's a downside to it, it's really just around The fact that, many times, you're sitting here trying to make a lot of beer to get it into the hands of your local consumers. And we have people who, buy so much of it and, buy out an entire store's worth of beer, and I think that's frustrating on one sense. You want the beer to get into as many hands as possible. On the other side, it is getting into a lot of hands, but just not the ones, at home. But there's risks with that, right? I mean, as the beer gets traded, we lose control over the quality aspects of it. We don't know how it's getting shipped. We don't know if they're keeping it cold. So, from a controllable standpoint, that's the piece that I think is scary about it shipping all over the country. But the reality is it's good. It's been very good for us, and certainly people demanding Tropicalia or Athena or the other beers, we forget how much people outside of Georgia are still interested in Tropicalia, for an example. We go to a festival and pour that and watch a line form. And, locally, it seems, at least in Athens, it's so much more readily available that, we're certainly proud of that, but we forget that to a lot of people, it's a brand new beer.
Yeah, I have a friend who lives in Florida, and he moved to Florida from Atlanta. And honestly, the best thing that I can send him is fresh packs of Tropicalia. And this past time, I actually sent him a 4-pack of Cocobuni and some Athena Paradiso. And honestly, he's going to be like blown away, tickled pink with it, because again, these are beers that we take for granted in this area, but I mean, they're still just incredible beers that a lot of people can't get their hands on. You talked a little bit about trading. What do you think about when we move into that area of like selling beers and actually selling, buying bottles? I know that, for me, when I first started trading, honestly, I didn't really have bottles of beer that people really wanted to trade for, because I was buying stuff off the shelf. And, as good as a beer like, I don't know, St. Bernardus Abbott 12 is, nobody's really going to trade for that beer. So when I first started trading, I actually had to go on to a couple of places and actually buy some bottles of beer that, had a bigger value on it, just so I had some sort of trade equity. What do you think of when we talk about the secondary market in terms of selling beers?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm a bigger fan of trading than sort of cash transactions for beer in the secondhand market. And that really is because, part of the beauty of trading to me is it's a reflection of the incredible growth of craft beer around the country, right? Most of us are very small and do not have the ability to send and sell our beer all around the country for myriads and myriads of reasons. And what's beautiful about trading is it's sort of just like, hey, here's something I'm proud of from my home, and you've got something you're proud of from your home, and let's trade that. And I think that's sort of the genesis of trading, right? Beer trading starts as like two buddies calling each other and saying, oh man, this new brewery down the road to me is awesome. And the other guy has a new brewery down the road to him that's awesome. And they start trading some beer back and forth. And it's turned into sort of a much bigger, almost like second business, right? When you start getting into the cash transaction, you're definitely moving further away from that mentality of like friend to friend, right? Where it's like, oh man, I'm going to send my buddy something. And you start getting into, almost like a fourth tier, right? This like consumer to consumer tier of transactions. So, I think the only challenge is from like a, personal standpoint is that, again, you don't, the further away you get from the source, the less control we have over the ability, to control the product and how well it tastes. And anytime someone is shelling out hard-earned cash, in particular for product, we want to make sure that they get the best experience possible. And so I think, from that standpoint, those are just the things that concern me is this quality product? Somebody's paying above, what I would, arguably is fair market value. Fair market value is whatever the market's going to pay for it. So, if someone's going to pay it, I guess it's reasonable. But without the same controls always around the quality of that beer, that sort of is my only real thing with it. At the end of the day, I think, I love the concept of beer trading and people sharing with friends all over the country. The more it becomes less personal and it gets into a business transaction, I just think there's additional risks that get carried. I think it loses, in my mind, a little bit of like the purpose of sort of craft beer. That said, somebody wants to pay somebody for beer and somebody wants to shell out money for it. It's a free world. Everybody gets to do what they want to do. I just, I think it's not quite the same in my mind as as guys who are just, trading for the sake of, sharing beer around.
Yeah, I actually had this thought last week. I was thinking about the fact that in my mind, these craft beers are they're the new baseball cards, right? I mean, I'm looking at a shelf wall filled with beers. Beers like Funky Buddha's Last Buffalo and Morningwood, Firestone Walker, Velvet Merkin, which I have a 4-year vertical of. And I'm basically collecting these like baseball cards when I was younger. And I'll open them up every once in a while, right, when I have a special share or something like that. But they become like our baseball cards.
But that's the beauty of it, right, is exactly what you said. Like, you open them up and you have a special share. I mean, it's like, we're trading beers around and we're holding them for opportunities to share with, friends and to create experiences and memories on. And, like, that's really cool. Like the idea that we are in a market and an industry where we can create products that can provide people opportunities to gather with friends and sit and chat. I mean, you go back to, the earliest breweries, and that's so much of what this industry was about. I mean, it was the end of the day. It was the meeting place. It was, hard-earned, beer. And that was the point of it. It wasn't just purely like, I'm going to go and try to consume a bunch of alcohol. It was an enjoyable reward that you would share with friends. And, I think that's just, when I hear sort of, I've got this 4-year vertical that I'm going to share with friends, like, that's awesome to me, and how did you get it? Does it matter to me? No. I mean, if it helps you create a memory with somebody in a really cool way, I think that's awesome, and for those who are just, holding them, I love, I hope everybody has a plan for them. It's sort of like, I hope, we brew them in the intent that they get consumed. I love Allagaster's Drink It Now hashtag and sort of that idea of like, some beers are obviously just fine to hold on to. Others we certainly would prefer consumers drink them quickly. But I hope, when people are trading or buying or whatever it is that, they're doing so with the idea of, being able to create, an experience with some other friends.
Yeah, that reminds me. I'm looking. Excuse me. One of the other things I'm looking at is, I've got a whole shelf with Evil Twins Jesus wine. So I've got, a 4-year vertical of Even More Jesus. I've got Double Barrel Jesus and Un Mas Cafe Jesus and Maple Jesus, and I literally have all of the Jesus variants. And I've joked around with friends about hosting a share called the Come to Jesus meeting, where we just open all of these bottles at one time. And again, like you said, it's about creating this experience around craft beer that, is something that they can't get everywhere. And it's something that we can do kind of as a community thing to kind of play on this idea that, craft beer really is this community kind of thing. And when I host bottle shares or when I attend bottle shares or other craft beer events, it's not so much about the beer as it is just about the gathering and coming together around a common interest, which is, really good craft beer.
Well, there's so few things you can do it around. I mean, it's like no one's going to get together and talk about their toothpaste. I mean, it's like this is a unique industry that we have this, and that some of the beers, are completely fine to be stored. So you can create verticals and you can create these really cool, awesome experiences that there's just not a lot of. I mean, sure, I think, wine, liquor, I'd say alcohol beverage industry in general provides these opportunities to people. And I think that's, and I've been to some of your bottle shares, and that is what it's about. I go there, because I'm interested in trying some beers that I wouldn't have been able to get my hands on. But also because, I want to be surrounded by a bunch of people who are interested in talking about beer, and who appreciate the work that goes into it. And I think that's something that I've personally just come to really enjoy about the trading community, those who are specifically in it for the purpose of enjoying good beer is, there's a lot of work that goes into this. These beers are not mass produced, and no shame on anyone that they are mass produced. I mean, heck, we mass produce, quote unquote, more than we used to, even at Creature. But I think the idea that people are getting together and having this opportunity to create experiences and share something, it's just, I don't know, it's super unique to me. There's a lot of work that goes into these. And so knowing that people are getting together, when we see, a bunch of posts of somebody drinking a Curious bottle in, New Hampshire, and you see 4 or 5 people posting about it at the same time, knowing that, man, that bottle is up creating dialogue and conversation amongst some friends. Like, there's a lot of work that went into making that beer, and that's pretty damn awesome to know that people are enjoying it and it's actually bringing, something more than just, something getting chugged. That's, as a brewery, that's something that I think is really exciting and, definitely great to get to know and get to see. And, I'm always happy to see that happening.
Yeah. I excuse me, I won lottery tickets to be able to buy bottles at the Kentucky Brunch Brand Stout and Assassin release this year at Top and Goliath, and got to make the trek up to Decorah, Iowa with a friend, and it was a really incredible experience. The incredible experience wasn't necessarily around the release itself; it was around all of the things that were happening around the release. There was a huge bottle share that was happening in downtown Decorah. The next morning, there were bottle shares at our hotel. I mean, literally, we went and checked into our hotel that night after flying into Minneapolis and then driving to our hotel. We were checking into our hotel, and in the breakfast area, 20, 30 guys, including a guy from here in Atlanta, Rick Bernard, were already having a bottle share. And I was just like blown away by the fact that, there's this really cool community element. But that leads me to another question that I have too, which is, I went up there for the KBBS release, and honestly, I didn't really think that I would win tickets. And then when I actually won the lottery to buy tickets, I actually had to look up on a map where Decorah, Iowa was, and initially I was like, oh, this should be a fun road trip to drive. And then I looked it up, and it was like 16 hours. And I said, well, this is definitely not going to be a road trip. So I didn't really plan on winning. And then once I won, I had to come to the realization that now I had a bottle of beer that was worth, in exclamation point, and $1,100.
Yep.
When do you ever drink a bottle of beer that's worth $1,100? And then my question to you is can any bottle of beer that's currently made really be worth $1,100? And then I think you mentioned, you alluded to it, is that it's worth what somebody will pay for it, right?
Well, that's the way the market works. I mean, so my view is there's certainly people make that proposition for wine. I personally believe, personal belief, that if you can find a bottle of wine worth that much money, then there's no reason that a bottle of beer can't be worth that much money. When you start talking that level of money, what you're talking about is the quality, also scarcity of the product. I think some of the things that make it a little more challenging with beer than wine is the ability for aging, long-term aging, right? So scarcity naturally products get more scarce over time because people consume them. And so there's less and less available in the market. And with beer, you don't necessarily have the same, 20-year lifeline. You certainly could, but it's not quite the same as wine, I think. I'd argue the other side is everything you touched on with the Decorah trip it was $1,100 bottle of beer. A lot of that money went to an experience, into a trip that had value, and it's sort of man, if you were to say, how much was that trip worth if I hadn't walked away with a bottle of beer, just everything else associated with it, then you really get to what's the true cost of the bottle of beer. And I think if we can get everyone, thinking in those terms a little bit more, it's not as hard to drink it,
Right. Yeah.
But
I'm glad you mentioned
and that's where we have a big responsibility as breweries now. And that's something I think is important to get out and to mention. Something we take really, really, really seriously here at Creature is the event itself, and the recognition. And you've been to Curious Releases. We work really hard on those events to ensure that it is an experience that people get, out of this. So that, yes, the price of beer, we try to price it fairly, that we believe it's approachable and, within reason for the scarcity of it, the amount of effort and work that went into it, but then also try to create an experience that somebody's going to look back on, and hopefully in the ideal world, they say, even if I hadn't got the beer, it would have been worth the experience, and I think the more that we're all able to try to, as breweries, create those experiences, the better it's going to be for the industry as well. And the more we'll be able to, have people happy to open those really rare bottles with friends.
Chris, you mentioned wine, and experiences aside, the rarity of some of these bottles of beer, it seems like the beer consumer isn't in the same place as, say, the wine, champagne, cognac consumer who would pay a lot more off the shelf, right? Because there are varying degrees of pricing. Whereas with beer, it's like we expect a 6-pack to cost a certain amount, a bomber to cost a certain amount, a pint to cost a certain amount. Where it seems like beer is the only alcoholic beverage industry that has to fit into that mold. And does it force you to back into pricing models or back into ingredients or anything?
I think the short answer is, I would say not into pricing models and ingredients. I mean, we make, you make beer that you're proud to make, and don't make beer bait to try to hit a price point. I think that's a good message for everyone out there. And don't get me wrong, like, it's done. I mean, people, I'm not going to use that much hops because of price. Like, we would prefer to make the beer to exact specifications of what we want to drink and then charge a price that we think is reasonable for those ingredients that are in there and for the, for everything else. But, I'm a big proponent that beer is undervalued in the marketplace. I think, you go into a nice fine dining restaurant and, if they have beer on the menu, like a, 750s, let's say they have a 750 that took a year and a half to make of a, barrel-aged saison, or who knows. That beer is, even if it's considered one of the best beers that there is, it'll be cheaper than probably the lowest priced wine on that place's menu, and that to me is where there is a huge disconnect. And, I'm not here to say beer needs to be more expensive, but I do believe that there's a disconnect between a certain group of consumers and, the work and energy that's put into it from the brewers. Certainly we're not dealing with some of the constraints from the agricultural side that winemakers deal with, but there's a lot that happens after, and through the fermentation process where we, potentially even have more influence over the character of the beer as a brewmaster does than a winemaker, although we don't deal with the agricultural challenges. So, I mean, you can't really compare industry to industry, but I'm not offended if I were to go to a restaurant and see a $70 bottle of beer that I thought was one of the best bottles of beer that I've had, and matter of fact, I'd love to start seeing that because I think beer deserves it. I think there's beer being made in America and all over the world, but that should interrupt the wine occasion, and as a result of that, we've got to get to where people are willing to pay, appropriate prices for that and the amount of work that goes into some of those beers.
I agree completely. It just seems like that's a contributing factor to a robust secondary market that is a area that the brewery can insert some amount of control, but it doesn't seem like anyone's been real comfortable to do that. Other than I've seen a couple of things from like Westbrook and a couple of other breweries that have done some things that have been like expensive initial releases or consume on premises, but it doesn't seem like it's that common enough yet.
I think we'll see it. I mean, the other side of that is look how young this industry in America is compared to, other wineries in America. So there's a bunch of education being done, but I mean, we've got, restaurant, we've got bars like Tourist, Luxus up in Brooklyn that are helping change that mentality. Even Staple House in Atlanta, who's got a, beer menu on theirs, and this is the best new restaurant in America, according to Bon Appetit, right? So there are restaurants that are pushing that a little bit, starting to say, no, you know what, beer can be just as good of a pairing, and it should be, priced. But I think breweries, we're always, I think a lot of us would charge more for the beer if there wasn't such a fear of what, like, the consumer demand is. And, pricing it's a reflection not only of the work you put into it, but of what consumers are willing to pay for the next best competitive offering in the market. I mean, if just one brewery went out tomorrow and started charging $100 for every 750 they did, it's not really, you're probably not going to end up with, anything but a bunch of disregard. But the reality is, the reason there's a secondary market selling a bottle that we maybe sold for $30 or $750 and someone else is buying it for $300 is there are some educated consumers out there who are treating the industry just like wine and who are saying, you know what, this deserves this, it commands this price, and I'm willing to pay it. But the average consumer, it's a very, very small part of the community compared to wine. I think we have a much broader, and spirits the same thing. You just have a lot more people who are much more comfortable spending that money. But that will continue to grow and it will continue to develop. And, the beer traders are the ones who are driving that. So.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about how breweries are kind of trying to work around the secondary market thing, and both Wayne and I talked about Westbrook Brewing down in Charleston actually released a beer this week called the Barrel Aged Mexican Cake Reserva, which is aged in, and it doesn't say Pappy Van Winkle barrels, it just says Van Winkle barrels. It's got maple syrup, Tahitian vanilla, Valrhona cocoa nibs, cinnamon, and fresh habaneros. They actually made that beer release on-premise consumption only. All of the bottles that they had were on-premise consumption only, and those bottles were $200 a bottle. And I think you're right. I think that Westbrook is trying to figure out what that answer is as well, and they're trying to figure out how they can get those prices to where they need to be too. And there was a lot of flack and a lot of pushback from a lot of their fans on their Facebook page around that price of $200. But I think you're right. I think it's a small number who believes that it's worth that, and that it's kind of that bottle of wine mentality.
And it's an interesting thing, man. I mean, the whole, it's like, just because someone will pay it isn't what you should charge. If you're a pure economist, you're going to say, yes, you maximize revenue at the highest price you can where you still sell out. So if they're able to sell out, great, from that perspective. We're in an industry, though, where we all have to also recognize that we built this on the backs of a lot of people who have supported us in getting there. And it's sort of just about where you want to play in that field. Do you want to put something out there that potentially it's not even your customer base who's coming anymore? It's a whole new group, that didn't help build your brand. It's a new world of people who are just got a lot of money and are willing to show off, so there's, and not to suggest by any means that that's what's happening, but there's this fine line, how do you walk the consumer there? I mean, there's a lot of people who, and it drives me nuts sometimes with a winery, there's some wines out there that I've loved and been supporting for a long time. And, you realize, man, it used to be $24.99 a bottle and now it's $82 a bottle, because everybody else got into it and the price goes up. Now, it doesn't bother me. I still support the winery. I'll buy it on occasion, but not nearly as much as I used to. It becomes more of a celebratory thing. But, I think there's a fine line there, it's sort of like, where do you want to play? And, what are we supposed to do as businesses, that are trying to fund operations? What's the right decision? Is it right to leave money on the table in order to make customers happy? Or is it right to, capitalize on it and not be as concerned, and say, look, this is the fair market value for the products? I mean, there's, as we grow as an industry, there's going to be a lot more of these kinds of questions. And, certainly it sounds like Westbrook's trying to figure their way out through that. I like the idea of being on site and having to consume it with friends. It goes towards that. Even Allagash drink it now. It avoids the secondary market of someone turning around and selling it for $200 or $300 a bottle, and you sold it to them for $30. And is that right? That you got $10 out of that bottle with profits and taxes and everything, and they got 170? I don't know. Maybe it's shame on the brewery for not selling it for $200 themselves.
Yeah, that's actually something that Wayne and I talked a little bit about before the call. We were talking about the money that brewers seem to leave on the table and can leave on the table, and how a brewery would have a hard time even figuring out what that number actually is, because it's based on a market value, and that could change, and there's no way of even determining what that value is.
You got to get access to the customer, right? And the reality is, particularly take Georgia, right, with our laws, like we're not even able to sell beer to begin with, but if we sell a pour, that's $30. Well,
that's where I was going next.
There is no selling beer across state lines to individuals. It's not like wineries where we can do a wine club and we can sell across state lines to another person, directly from the brewery. So there's not a lot. There's almost like no way for me to get that customer and call it, Indiana, who's willing to pay $300 for a bottle of See the Stars. Like the only option is for me to trade it or sell it to somebody locally who then turns around and handles it through their own channels, right, to move the product across the country. And so because of that, the market, we're not dealing with the whole U.S. when we're looking at our pricing. We have to move our quantity through the local market only. And therefore, you really, I mean, what you're talking about is it's supply demand. You're reducing the number of consumers who are potential customers, and therefore the demand is going to be potentially lower, and therefore you have to price it more appropriately. You know, knowing that because we don't have a mechanism to get this customer across the country. You know, if you could, would you change your price? I don't know. You know, then you'd price out your local consumers. So, you know, it's a constant battle. It's something we think about a lot. I mean, our goal here at Creature, at least, is just to do releases with product that we think fairly represents the amount of effort, value, and time put into the beer and the quality of it, while at the same time trying to ensure that consumers get a great experience while they're here as well, so that, you know, that there's more to it than just the price of the beer.
Chris, will the ability to sell locally, direct to consumer, give you a couple more levers to pull on that front?
I mean, with the tour system as it is today, we've been able to get some product into consumers' hands through sort of the free souvenirs on some special release tours. So there's been a small mechanism in place for us to do some very limited pieces of that. You know, certainly the challenge is that when you're limited the way that we have been on the number of ounces that's allowed to go out, you're again reducing. Like, you're not necessarily, well, somebody might not be willing to travel as far if they can only get 2 bottles versus if they could get 10 bottles. So certainly as we move towards the ability to sell beer directly to consumers at a larger, at any quantity, but even with the amount leaving the brewery to potentially be closer to 288 ounces as proposed in HB 85, all of a sudden, you know, that will open up the more, because more people are going to look at, even from Atlanta, the cost of traveling to Athens to be, you know, less when you split that cost out amongst 11 bottles as opposed to 2 bottles. And so, yeah, I think, you know, getting the ability to sell will change. It'll increase demand for the products versus what it is today, because we'll be able to reach a wider audience or attract a wider audience.
So you talked a little bit about State Bill 85, and I know that so far it looks like it's passed smoothly in the state. I know there's been a lot of people kind of working together on that front. I know that, you know, I personally want to give you kudos for kind of being a catalyst and a driver in that whole push, the most recent push in Georgia law for craft beer. What do you think that looks like in terms of, you know, how breweries become a lot more active in that scene in states to kind of bring their laws current? Because, you know, most of these laws were created in a time where craft beer not only was it not such a big deal, but it also wasn't such a financial driver in states as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so thank you. It has been a lot of work. I've been fortunate enough to be able to get really involved from the beginning as, you know, vice president of our Georgia Guild, and then as the chair of sort of the government affairs committee on the brewery side. Bob Sanders with Wrecking Bar supports the brew pub side, and then obviously Carly, our president's very involved. Joel, from the outgoing president's been extremely involved. You know, Nick last year from Cherry Street did so much of this. So, I mean, there's been a lot of people working for a long time to, you know, twist this cap. What we did differently this year than the past was we really took the conversation to the wholesalers in a sit-down meeting, you know, and just sort of, you know, I think the view is we have difficult conversations with our wholesalers all the time as it relates to, you know, just market conditions and things we want to see be done differently. But at the same time, they're a vital part of our business. And, you know, we leave those conversations, at least speaking for us at Creature, you know, having a beer afterwards and going to grab a bite to dinner. You know, I mean, we can have difficult conversations without being enemies with each other. And so, you know, we were able to, you know, leverage the opportunity we had to sit down at a table and negotiate with them. And I think for me, you know, it's what seems to be working for us this year. We were able to come to terms that we both agreed on to allow for direct sales. But, you know, I think in other states that are going through the same thing, it's, you know, we have this tendency to want to be David versus Goliath and to want to be, you know, that to be the rhetoric that's out there. And although there is some truth in the concept of like us being newer and smaller and maybe less organized and don't have the history down at the Capitol and all that stuff, you know, the reality is we're business partners with a lot of these guys, and the most beneficial thing we've seen is trying to get them to sit down at the table and share the reasons that we have, the feelings that we have, but also understanding, where they're coming from and trying to put together solutions that truly will move the entire industry forward. And I think, there's a lot of states out there that still have a long way to go with getting to the spot where we want to be. And, I think Georgia's taken some really good steps towards a much better future, and hopefully we'll see it finish strong and get through. And then you'll have an opportunity to look and see how that plays out and see what other things, if any, are best for the industry. I mean, there's a lot of examples in a lot of other markets that are even more favorable to breweries than what we have currently. And, we're always going to be looking, I think, at what the opportunities are to move the industry forward.
Yeah, well, it's an ever changing and steadily evolving topic, and it will continue to be. Craft beer continues to be just such a huge financial driver for so many people and so many families, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it. That's one of the reasons why I do the Craft Beer 101s and why I spend so much time championing brewers in my areas, because these people are my friends. They're friends and families, and I think that they as historically they have been, they will continue to be huge assets to our community. And so both Wayne and I want to thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today and talking about these things with us. Obviously, we appreciate your time and value it immensely. And so thanks so much for your thoughts on this.
Well, happy to do it, and thank you guys. We're as breweries, we're extremely grateful to you guys and everyone out there like you, whether it's through just sharing a message with a friend, talking about beer, encouraging local restaurants to carry craft beer, writing senators, lobbyists, getting involved in any way, shape, or form. And you guys helping spread the message of craft beer and what we're doing and what we're about. Like you said, these are generally family businesses. Me and my wife moved in with my dad and my mom, at 30-something years of age, while she was pregnant with our third child, to get this thing off the ground. And, these are real businesses. These are real people's stories. There's stories behind every one of these breweries that are interesting and unique if you take the time to get to know them. And, we've now gone from something that was 5 of us when we started it to 25 pretty much full-time employees now. We've got, health benefits. We've watched employees buy their first home, buy new cars. It really is, this industry is an incredible industry. It creates a lot of jobs, and we're grateful to be a part of it, and really, really appreciative for you guys and the support that you send our way, and meaning, ours and all craft brewers. So thanks for what you guys are doing. We really appreciate it as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chris. And if you want to learn more about Creature Comforts, go to creaturecomforts.com. Check out their beer and their events.
CreatureComfortsBeer.com. CreatureComfortsBeer.com. There you go. And just kind of check out what their mission is. Read up a little bit more about them. They've got some great videos. If you're not in this area, which is the area that Wayne and I are in, which is the Atlanta area, they are at events. I think last weekend they were in Cincinnati. They're in California. Yeah, we're at Revival events. We'll be down at Hunapude this year. We've got Street Fair. We're going to be back at Firestone Walker Invitational. We've got Boulevardia this year. So we're trying to spread it out, kind of all around the country. We really enjoy getting out and meeting people.
Yeah, and if you can't make those events, man, you guys are killing it on Instagram. Everybody should definitely go there too.
Appreciate it, Shannon. Shannon does a great job on that for us.
Absolutely.
I get no credit on that. That or beer.
Yeah, well,
thank you very much.
Yeah, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing what you guys do at Creature Comforts, and thank you for all that you're doing for craft beer in not only in our area but in the country. So thank you, Chris.
You got it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
So that was an amazing call.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, Chris is a great guy. Again, they're doing really good things at Creature Comforts, and I'm excited to see what they do in the future. So
you want to after party for just a few minutes here?
Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah, absolutely.
It's after party. I got a few more minutes.
Yeah, after party.
My wife's gonna kill me. I'm gonna get home so late.
Yeah.
All right. So so your event last night really was a tribute to Jay.
Yep. Jay was
R.I.P.
Yeah, we talked about that.
He was a Yorkie, right?
He was a Yorkie. My wife and I.
And we talked about your loss.
Yep, we did talk about that.
You know, I feel you. I get it. But
we were not able to have kids. My wife has some health issues, and so for many years we had tried to figure out like what that thing was going to be for us. We talked about adoption, and I kind of thought that if we couldn't adopt like a kid, a dog would be something really helpful. And my wife finally said, "Okay, we'll do it," and
dogs
we did.
Are lovely. And now you couldn't pry the dogs from our cold, dead hands.
That's exactly right.
Right?
That's exactly right. They became like they were inseparable.
Yeah.
And so he became my wife's service dog as she goes through chemo, and
that's amazing.
Just a really, really cherished member of our family. And so when we lost him, it was a terrible thing. But I had this idea to try to brew a beer that would be in his honor, and included two of my favorite things, which are Belgian beers and coffee. I'm kind of known as like coffee guy. And so it made sense that I finally brew a beer that had coffee in it. So I actually took a standard traditional Belgian triple recipe that is, again, it's just a traditional Belgian triple recipe. And then I added fresh roasted coffee from Counterculture in Durham, North Carolina.
Is there a Belgian beer that has coffee in it that you can name off the top of your head?
Nope.
There are American brewers that do Belgian beers that have coffee in their beer that I can name.
Not traditional brewers though, and I couldn't actually.
Three Taverns has that. Was it Quasimodo? That has a Belgian yeast in it.
Yeah. Does it have coffee in it?
It might not technically have coffee in it. I could be eating it on this.
Yeah,
one.
I'm not sure about that one.
But anyway, so
I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to brew this Belgian triple with coffee in it as a way to honor him. And we actually popped the bottles last night. Yeah, you're drinking.
I just finished it. I was
going to say, you just finished it. We moved on to the Athena Paradiso, but you thought it tasted like peanut butter.
Peanut butter, which may have just been a product of the fruity Belgian yeast with the, coffee in it backbone.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the goal of it was that it was a Belgian triple, which I really like, that Belgian candy sugar, that sweet taste, and then coffee, which I really like. And then the outcome delicious. Is that it's kind of a peanut buttery Belgian triple.
So the one in the secondary right now, it's around here somewhere.
No, I already bottled it. The bottles are right next to you.
Oh, here they are.
That's That's the FS, which is First Snow, which is my play on Funky Buddha's Last Snow.
The opposite of Last Snow. It
is the first snow because it was my and honestly, the way that I did it, I used coconut and cocoa nibs and vanilla beans as Funky Buddha does, but I actually brewed the coffee for it. And I tend to think that all of the ingredients add a very specific element to it. Mm-hmm. And I hand brewed the coffee for it. I chose the coffee that I used for it.
Did you roast it? You didn't roast it.
No, I didn't roast it. No. But I did choose the coffee that I used for it, and I hand brewed it and added it just when bottling. And so I tasted it to parameters. I actually have a little bit in there that I'm going to let you try in just a little bit. I have a little bit in a mason jar.
Sweet.
That I had a little bit extra when bottling, but that bottle of beer is right next to you.
I'll take
got 2 cases of it.
Stick it in my bag.
Yeah, got 2 cases of it, and right next to that is the sour porter that I brewed, which was originally supposed to be First Snow.
Sour porter is a unique combination.
Yeah, it was not intentional to be a sour porter. That was that is
made it come on my nose.
Out of 12 batches so far, that was my first ever infection surprise. So I said, well, that's just a real nice surprise.
When I've done that, it was like pepper or banana, one of the aftertastes that you don't want.
No, it's good. It's just it tastes a little sour, and it's actually really drinkable as a sour porter. It still has coconut.
If you label it sour and tart, then
if I didn't tell you,
if they know that the intention was there,
that's
then all
right.
of a sudden you're like,
you would have never known
amazing.
that. Actually,
wow,
I took it to that sour beer dinner
right on the
that I went to last week, and some of my friends were like, "Oh my god, man, that's really good!" And I was like, "Oh, good." good. I'm glad you like it.
Wicked
I'm not going to
Weed.
dump it.
Wicked Weed is too good at sour beers.
Yeah, really.
So good at that.
I let the guy drink it, and he's like, "Yeah, this reminds me of our Silencio," and I was like, "Oh, don't tell me that." Literally, this was an accident. So that's what's next.
Silencio is really good.
Silencio is really good. It's their coffee. It's a coffee sour ale that they do, and that beer is phenomenal. So
Yeah, it's like $25 for a little bitty bottle of it. You're like, okay,
it's
great.
so good. We should talk about that in a future show. We should talk about the future of bottle prices and the fact that bottle prices keep going up.
We should. I think they should go up. I think they will go up.
I think they have to
I think
go
they
up.
have to go up.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think his point about I think Chris's point about not brewing to keep prices down.
Yep.
And brewing to hit a style or a goal, like a flavor goal, is important. But I think that you can't at scale put more ingredients into a beer and then charge certain prices for it that people would only be expecting based on history, right? It's a little bit of what got us here won't get us to where we want to go next. Like, I think we have to pay more. Look, wine, you pay more. There are champagnes at $5. There are champagnes at $500. There are cognacs at $25 and cognacs at $2,500. That's just the way that goes. And beer is not there, but I think it's got to get there, dude.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, when I look at, like, I'm looking at this rare barrel.
I like saving money. Don't get me wrong. I like paying low prices for stuff, but at scale, you can't produce something that great.
No, this Wicked Weed rare barrel collaboration that I'm looking at, Happy Blending, says that they travel to one another's breweries, which has a cost. And then it says they combined the beer from these barrels with 3 pounds of plums and nectarines per gallon. And that has a cost, right? 3 pounds of plums
outside
and nectarines.
of the typical ingredients of a beer, the malt,
exactly.
the water,
what does that cost?
Hops, the
6
yeast.
pounds per gallon. How many gallons did they make? I mean, you do the math.
How many gallons did they make of that?
And you got to remember
You bought
too
a
that
case.
it sat in barrels for a year, and they were just sitting on that. They couldn't get any money out of
Right.
it, and then also after that, they couldn't make a lot of it at one time, so they have a limited amount of it.
It's fascinating how many variables there are. So
really
while we
are,
don't
so.
have the ecological variables that wine has, because you can put a brewery anywhere and you can't put a winery anywhere.
Yep.
But even at that smaller accessibility scale, there are still ingredients that go into these things that at scale you have to be able to price for and get the appropriate amount of value. I feel like breweries are not getting the correct amount of value for some of these beers that they're producing that are next level stuff that they're just charging run of the mill prices for.
I will agree with you.
Not that I want to pay more for stuff. Don't get me wrong, but it just seems broken. It seems like, yeah, we're in our and Chris mentioned this. We're in our infancy because the beer industry in the States is really young. It's only been thriving for about 25 years. The craft industry has only been around for about 40, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sam Adams here in Nevada, some of the early adopters of craft beer. And beer itself has only been in the States. I mean, let's face it, since our inception, it's only been a couple hundred years.
Yep.
Right. Meanwhile, in Germany and Belgium, there are breweries that are 20 times older than that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think about like, I want to say like Creature Comforts, for instance. I'm using them as an example because we've been talking about them on the show. We had Chris on the show,
right.
this show, and we talked about, the fact that they really became popular, I guess. I hate to say this, based on their Tropicalia, which is their IPA that is tropical fruits. It's like passion fruit and guava and mango.
Yeah, they did.
And honestly, that IPA was the IPA that got me into IPAs. I didn't actually drink IPAs at all before then.
What?
I didn't drink them. I didn't like them. I thought that they were too bitter, and that IPA made me think that IPAs could be better. But they primarily,
it's a great IPA.
Yeah, they use Citra in that IPA, which is
trending.
Huh?
It's trending.
Which is trending right now. But in their newest beer, the Green Ghost, which they actually used a brand new German hop varietal called Grüngeist, which it has flavors of peach, lemon, and passion fruit. They actually are out seeking out new hop varieties and actually helping start new hop varieties. Because
I think everybody is. You've got to take IPA somewhere, and I don't think it's going to be with adjuncts. So a long time ago, it was all the hops that were being used for IPAs. You know, when you stepped up out of the more typical low alpha acid hops into the bigger ones, like say Columbus or Centennial.
Yep.
And those became common just because they had higher acidity. And then at some point you're like, okay, those are giving me dry mouth. Well, you got the chalky feel, especially with some of the darker IPAs with darker malt profile, you would get the chalky feel. Now they're like, well, what hops can we use that are a little more green, a little more fresh, or have these different profiles that are closer to, say, grapefruit and some of these other citrus fruits like pineapple and stuff like that. So, it stands to reason you have to find new hops to advance the IPA category, because the IPA category is so narrow, it's not going to allow for a ton of adjuncts. Although there are breweries adding small amounts of oats and things in order to mess with the mouthfeel a little bit, in order to make it a little creamier, touchier, flour. Try to bring maybe a little more of the aromatics out. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. That just seems like that would be a natural course. By the way, this is a shit after party. We have totally started talking about beer again. So what else you got?
Good. That's it, man.
That's it? All right. So we're going to do this again in a couple of weeks. We got to get ahead of schedule. Okay.
Yep. That sounds good.
We're going to give that a shot.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, buddy.
Thank you. Thanks for this episode.
Woohoo.
We'll see you again in a few weeks.
More beer.
More beer.
Drive safe. As always, thank you for listening. You can find us both all over the social medias. Jason on Instagram at Domini Imbibes, and on Twitter at Jason Domini. Both on Untapped. You can search our names in there. We also have an email alias now, so sip@lastbeershow.com. No big deal, but if there is someone you think would contribute to an interesting beer conversation, hit us on Twitter, like I said, at The Last Beer Show, or email us sip@lastbeershow.com. Peace.